You missed a spot, old man. The voice came sharp and careless, cutting clean through the steady rhythm of iron and breath inside the sealed gym. Plates clanged against steel racks, rubber saws squeaked across black matting, and the low hum of industrial fans pushed warm air heavy with sweat and chalk dust across the room. Caleb Mercer didn't look up. He stood near the deadlift platform, one hand steady on a worn push broom, the other tightening the black liner inside a dented trash can. His gray janitor shirt hung loose on his frame, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal thin wrists mapped with veins and time. Around him, bodies moved with purpose, broad shoulders, tight form, controlled aggression, young men at the peak of strength, counting reps like currency. Caleb moved differently. Slow, precise, economical. Like every step had already been measured long before it happened. Hey! The same voice pressed, louder now, chasing attention. Chief Petty Officer Logan Pike stepped closer, a barbell resting across his shoulders, sweat running down the side of his neck. He nudged the trash can with his boot, sliding it a few inches toward Caleb. Careful where you park that thing. This floor's for operators. A few nearby SEALs smirked without breaking rhythm. One of them let out a short laugh, the kind that didn't ask permission. Caleb adjusted the liner, smoothed it down, and tied it off with a simple knot. No reaction. No acknowledgment. Just work. The absence of response seemed to irritate Pike more than any comeback would have. He shifted the bar off his shoulders with a metallic clatter and stepped closer, invading space that Caleb didn't defend. You even know what this place is? Pike asked, tilting his head slightly, studying the old man like an object out of place. Or did you just wander in from some retirement center and grab a mop? The words hung there, sharp but casual, like they'd been used before. Caleb reached down, picked up a stray strip of athletic tape from the floor, and dropped it into the bin. His movements were steady, unhurried. If he heard the insult, he didn't carry it. If he understood it, he didn't answer. Around them, the gym kept moving, bench presses rising and falling, kettlebells swinging in controlled arcs, a stopwatch beeping somewhere near the far wall. Life went on, indifferent to small moments. Pike exhaled. Through his nose, a faint grin pulling at the corner of his mouth. That's what I thought, he muttered, turning back toward his rack. Invisible. Caleb finally shifted position, guiding the broom along the edge of the platform. The bristles whispered against the rubber, gathering dust that no one else noticed. His posture remained slightly bent, his steps measured in inches rather than strides. To anyone watching, he was exactly what he appeared to be, a quiet old janitor, moving through a room that had no reason to remember him. And yet, for just a fraction of a second, as he paused at the corner of the platform, his eyes lifted, not toward Pike, not toward the men lifting, but toward the far wall where a faded unit emblem hung behind glass. His gaze settled there, steady and unreadable, before dropping back to the floor as if nothing had passed at all. The broom moved again. The room kept breathing. And the old man kept working, unnoticed by everyone who thought they understood exactly who he was. Caleb Mercer had learned a long time ago that the easiest way to move through a room full of strong men was to become something they did not need to see. The trick was not in hiding, but in removing any reason to be noticed at all. He kept his eyes low, not in submission, but in economy. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then, just enough to answer the question without inviting another. The gym helped with that. It was a place built on focus, on repetition, on numbers that mattered more than faces. In a room like this, anything that did not contribute to performance simply faded into the background, and Caleb made sure he belonged to that category. He pushed the broom along the edge of the lifting area, collecting the fine white dust left behind by chalked hands and worn grips. The scent of it mixed with metal and sweat, a familiar blend that clung to the air. A barbell dropped somewhere behind him with a heavy thud, followed by a short burst of laughter and the sharp call of someone counting the last repetition. Come on, one more. A voice urged, full of energy and impatience. Caleb did not turn. He had heard that tone before, in places far louder than this, in moments where the stakes were not measured in sets or seconds. The difference here was that no one in this room thought about what came after the last repetition. They only thought about finishing it. He reached the far corner near the wall, where a row of framed photos hung just above eye level for most of the men inside. Old images. black and white in some cases, faded color in others. Teams standing shoulder to shoulder, faces younger, uniforms less polished, eyes carrying something that did not show up in modern portraits. Caleb slowed for just a fraction of a second as he passed them. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for memory to press lightly against the present. Then he kept moving. "Hey, janitor." Pike's voice came again from across the room, louder this time, pulling a few more heads in Caleb's direction. "You ever lift anything heavier than that trash bag?" A couple of the younger operators chuckled, not out of cruelty, but out of habit, the kind of laughter that followed whoever held the room at the moment. Caleb guided the broom into the corner, angled it, and swept the dust into a neat line. His hands were steady, no tremor, no wasted motion. He set the broom aside, bent slightly, and lifted the trash bag from the bin with a single, smooth motion. It was heavier now, filled with discarded wraps, tape, and empty bottles. He carried it without strain, his posture unchanged. Pike watched for a second, expecting a hitch, a stumble, something that would confirm the picture he had already decided was true. It did not come. "Guess you have got something left?" Pike muttered, not quite loud enough to sound like praise, not quiet enough to be ignored. Caleb did not respond. He walked toward the exit door at the far end of the gym, where a narrow hallway led to the service area. As he passed beneath the fluorescent lights, the fabric of his collar shifted slightly with his movement, just enough to reveal the faint edge of skin at the back of his neck. The mark there was barely visible unless someone knew to look for it, a blurred line of ink softened by decades. Most people would have missed it entirely. Most people did not spend their time looking for things that did not belong. Caleb pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped into the quieter corridor beyond. The noise of the gym dulled behind him, reduced to a distant rhythm of metal and voices. For a moment, the air felt different. Cooler. Still. He tied off the trash bag, set it aside for collection, and reached for a clean liner without hesitation. His routine did not break. It never did. Whatever the room thought of him, whatever names were thrown his way, none of it altered the pace of his work. Because for Caleb Mercer, the work was never the point. It was simply the reason he was allowed to stand there unnoticed, right in the middle of everything. The door eased shut behind Caleb Mercer with a soft click, and for a moment the hallway held a quiet that the gym never allowed, a stillness broken only by the distant thud of weights and the low hum of ventilation moving air through steel ducts overhead. He did not linger in it. He reached for a fresh liner, shook it open with a practiced snap, and fitted it into the empty can as if the motion had been repeated 1,000 times without variation. Because it had. Routine was not just habit for Caleb. It was structure. It kept everything else where it belonged. Out of sight. Out of reach. Back inside the gym, the rhythm had shifted slightly. More eyes had started to follow the old man's path, not out of respect, but curiosity sharpened by Pike's continued attention. The room had a way of orbiting whoever spoke the loudest, and right now, that was still him. "I swear," Pike said, wiping his hands on a towel as he glanced toward the hallway door. "They keep hiring ghosts for this place." A few of the men chuckled again, lighter this time, but still enough to carry. Not everyone joined in. Petty Officer Ethan Shaw stood near the far rack, adjusting the plates on a barbell he had already loaded twice. His hands moved, but his attention had drifted. He had been watching the exchange from the beginning, not with amusement, but with a quiet unease he could not quite explain. It was not what Pike said. That part was normal. It was what the old man did not do. No reaction. No flinch. No change in pace. Shaw had seen that kind of stillness before, but not in places like this. The door opened again, and Caleb stepped back into the gym carrying the empty bin, now lined and ready. He moved along the outer edge of the room, keeping to the margins as always, but this time the space felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just tighter, as if something unseen had drawn a line through the middle of it. Pike noticed him immediately. "Hey," he called out, sharper now, drawing full attention. "You ever serve, or you just clean up after people who did?" The question landed heavier than the jokes before it, hanging in the air long enough that even the steady beat of training seemed to slow around it. Caleb did not stop walking. He set the bin down near a rack, adjusted its position by an inch, and reached for the broom again. His silence stretched, not weak, not uncertain, just present. Pike stepped closer, boots tapping lightly against the rubber floor, closing distance that had not been offered. "I asked you something," he said, voice lower now, less playful. "You understand English, right?" Caleb straightened slightly, just enough to ease the bend in his back, and turned his head a fraction. His eyes met Pike's for the first time. They were pale, steady, and completely without urgency. "I do," Caleb said. His voice was quiet, rough with age but clear. Nothing more followed. No explanation. No story. Just those two words, placed exactly where they needed to be. Pike held the look for a second longer than expected, as if waiting for something else to come with it. It did not. Behind him, Shaw felt that same unease tighten in his chest. There was something in the way the old man had answered, not defensive, not proud, just certain. The kind of certainty that did not need to prove itself. Caleb broke eye contact first, returning to the floor, guiding the broom in slow, even strokes. The moment passed on the surface, conversation picking back up in fragments, weights lifting again, the room returning to its pattern. But underneath it, something had shifted, not in what was seen, but in what was beginning to be noticed. And for the first time since he had walked in that morning, Caleb Mercer was no longer completely invisible. The rhythm of the room never truly stopped, but it shifted again in ways most of the men inside could not name. A subtle tightening in the air as attention began to gather around something that had not yet revealed itself. Caleb Mercer continued his work along the perimeter, the broom moving in steady arcs, collecting what others left behind without a word or pause. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a flat, even glow across the rubber flooring, catching the faint swirl of chalk dust each time the bristles passed over it. Nothing about his movement invited scrutiny, and yet more eyes followed him now than before. Not openly, not enough to admit it, but enough to notice. Logan Pike rolled his shoulders, resetting under the bar as if to shake off the moment, but his gaze kept drifting back. There was something about the old man's answer that did not sit right, not because of what he said, but because of what he did not. Pike had spent his career around men who proved themselves constantly, loudly, with numbers, with records, with stories that filled rooms. This one did none of that, and still did not bend. "You got a name?" Pike called out again, tone lighter but edged with something sharper beneath. "Or do we just keep calling you Janitor?" A few heads turned fully now, the question simple enough to seem harmless, but direct enough to demand something back. Caleb slowed just slightly, the broom coming to a brief rest against the floor. He did not turn his body this time, only his head, just enough for his voice to carry. "Mercer," he said. The name landed quietly, without emphasis, without expectation. Just a fact placed into the room. Pike nodded once, as if filing it away for later use. "All right, Mercer," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Good to finally meet you." It sounded like courtesy, but it was not. Caleb returned to his work without answering. The exchange ended as quickly as it began, but it left a thin line of tension running through the space. At the far entrance, the door opened with a firm push, and the atmosphere changed in a way that did not need announcement. Conversations lowered by instinct, posture adjusted by habit. Commander Nathan Cole stepped inside, his presence cutting through the noise without raising his voice. He moved with purpose, eyes scanning the room not for spectacle, but for detail, for the small things that told him whether everything was as it should be. Most of the men straightened slightly, not out of fear, but respect ingrained through repetition. Cole acknowledged none of it directly, his attention already moving across the floor, taking in the arrangement of equipment, the pacing of drills, the discipline of movement. Then his gaze passed over Caleb Mercer. It did not stop. Not at first. Just a glance, one more figure in the background, exactly where he was supposed to be. Caleb bent to adjust the edge of a mat near the free weight area, his hand pressing it flat against the floor. As he did, the collar of his shirt shifted again, just slightly, just enough. It was not a full reveal, not even close. Only a narrow line of faded ink at the base of his neck, half hidden by fabric and age. Something most would not notice, or if they did, would dismiss as old, meaningless, out of place. But Commander Cole's steps slowed. Not stopped, just slowed, a fraction of a second that almost no one caught. His eyes moved back, more carefully this time, narrowing the distance between what he had seen and what it meant. The room continued around him, unaware, but something had already changed. Caleb straightened, pulling the collar back into place without thinking, the mark disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. For everyone else, nothing had happened. For one man standing near the entrance, something had just begun. Commander Nathan Cole did not stop walking, but every step after that fraction of a second carried a different weight, as if something old and precise had just aligned in his mind without permission. The gym continued to move around him, voices rising and falling, metal striking metal in controlled rhythm, but his attention had narrowed to a single detail that most would have dismissed before it fully registered. A line of ink. Faded. Incomplete. Almost erased by time. But not gone. He had seen thousands of tattoos in his career, most loud, deliberate, meant to be recognized. This was not one of them. This one had been placed where it was never meant to be shown, and more importantly, it had been made in a way no standard unit would ever authorize. Cole adjusted his path slightly, not toward Caleb directly, but along a line that would bring him closer. Without drawing attention, he did not call out. He did not interrupt. He observed. That was what years of command had taught him, that the smallest details often carried the heaviest truths. Across the room, Logan Pike had noticed the shift in atmosphere, even if he could not define it. The commander's presence always changed the room, but this felt different. More focused. Pike stepped back from his rack, wiping his hands again, watching as Cole moved through the space with measured calm. Caleb, for his part, remained unchanged. He guided the broom along the seam where two mats met, pressing lightly to gather the fine line of dust that had settled there. His breathing was even. His shoulders relaxed. If he had noticed the commander's attention, he gave no sign of it. Cole slowed as he passed within a few feet of him, close enough now to confirm what he had glimpsed before. For a brief moment, the angle was right. The collar shifted again, just slightly with the movement of Caleb's arm, and the mark revealed itself a second time. Not fully. Never fully. Just enough. A curved line. A break in symmetry. A shape that meant nothing to anyone who had not spent years studying things that were never written down. Cole's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. The gym faded for him, not in sound, but in relevance. His mind moved somewhere else entirely, pulling from a place he did not often visit, a place where names were spoken carefully, if at all. The ink was wrong for decoration. Too deliberate in its imperfection. Too specific in its placement. It was not a symbol meant to be recognized. It was a mark meant to be remembered by those who already knew. Caleb straightened again, adjusting his grip on the broom, and this time his hand paused for just a fraction longer at the base of his neck, as if confirming something that had already been there for decades. It was not a defensive motion, not protective, just habitual. A check, like making sure a watch was still on the wrist. Cole stopped. Not abruptly, not enough to draw eyes from across the room. Just a pause and stride that would have gone unnoticed by anyone not already watching him. Ethan Shaw saw it. From across the gym, he had been tracking the commander's movement without meaning to. The same instinct that had picked up on Caleb's stillness earlier, now pulling his attention here. Shaw did not know what the commander had seen, but he knew what it meant when a man like Nathan Cole paused without explanation. Something mattered. Cole did not speak. He did not question. Not yet. He simply stood there for one quiet second, looking at a man everyone else had already decided they understood, and in that second, the balance of the room shifted again, deeper this time, beneath the surface where most of the men still laughed and lifted, unaware that the simplest detail in the room had just become the most important thing in it. The moment passed for everyone else, but not for Nathan Cole. He resumed walking, slow and deliberate. Each step measured not by distance, but by thought, as if he were moving through something far more complex than a room filled with steel and noise. The mark he had seen did not belong here. It did not belong anywhere that had records, or insignias, or official briefings with clean lines and clear explanations. It belonged to a different layer entirely, one that existed just beneath the surface of everything men like him operated within, but rarely spoke about out loud. Caleb Mercer moved again, guiding the broom along the edge of the platform, his posture unchanged, his rhythm uninterrupted. To anyone watching, he was still exactly what he appeared to be. That was the point. That had always been the point. Cole stopped again, this time near a rack of neatly organized dumbbells, his hand resting lightly against the cold metal as if grounding himself in the present. But his mind had already shifted. The gym dissolved in importance, replaced by a memory that did not come back all at once, but in fragments, like pieces of something long buried beginning to surface. It was not a place he visited often, not because he could not, but because there had never been a reason to. Until now, the air in that memory felt different. Not louder, not more chaotic, just heavier, charged with a kind of silence that only came before something irreversible. He could not see faces clearly, not anymore. Time had blurred those details. But he remembered the posture, the way men stood when they understood the cost of what they were about to do and accepted it without discussion. There had been no insignias visible then either. No names spoken for the sake of record. Only a small, crude design drawn onto skin with tools that were never meant for precision, marking something that did not exist on paper but would be carried long after everything else was gone. A curved line, imperfect. A break in symmetry, intentional. A mark that said nothing to the world, but everything to the few who knew what it meant. Cole's jaw tightened again, this time just enough to feel it. That design had not been taught in any training he had received. It had not appeared in any official archive he had studied. It had existed in whispers, in brief mentions that were quickly redirected, in conversations that ended before they began. And yet he had seen it once before, years ago, in a briefing that had not been recorded, delivered by a man who had chosen his words carefully and then never repeated them. Back in the present, the sound of a barbell settling into its rack snapped lightly against his awareness, but it did not pull him fully back. His eyes moved again to Caleb, who had now reached the far end of the room, replacing another liner, adjusting it with the same quiet precision as before. Nothing about him demanded attention, and yet everything about him now held it. Across the gym, Ethan Shaw felt the change deepen. He had seen the commander's face shift, just slightly, but enough. Enough to know that whatever had just been recognized was not small, not trivial, not something that would pass with a simple explanation. Shaw did not know what the mark meant, but he understood something else entirely. Men like Nathan Cole did not hesitate. They did not question what they already understood. And right now, the commander was not questioning. He was remembering. Caleb finished securing the liner, his hands moving with the same steady certainty they had carried all morning. For him, nothing had changed. Not in action, not in pace, but somewhere beneath that quiet routine, something older than the room itself remained exactly where it had always been, waiting for the rare moment when someone would finally recognize it for what it truly was. The room kept moving, but Ethan Shaw no longer saw it the same way. The repetitions, the weight, the noise, all of it had shifted into the background, replaced by a quiet tension that had settled somewhere deeper than sound. He had been watching Commander Cole long enough to recognize the difference between attention and focus, and what he was seeing now was something else entirely. It was recognition, not curiosity, not suspicion, something more final. Shaw stepped away from the rack, slow enough not to draw attention, his hands wiping against his shorts as if he were just resetting between sets. His eyes moved once more toward Caleb Mercer, who was now near the far wall, adjusting the angle of a mat with careful precision, pressing it flat as if the smallest misalignment mattered. To everyone else, it did not. To Shaw, it suddenly did. There was a pattern forming, not in what the old man was doing, but in what he was not. No wasted motion, no reaction to pressure, no need to prove anything. Shaw had seen men like that before, but never in this context, never holding a broom instead of a weapon, never standing in plain sight while being dismissed as nothing. He turned slightly, just enough to bring Commander Cole back into view. The commander had not moved much, but the stillness itself was the signal. His posture had changed, subtle but undeniable. He was no longer scanning the room. He was locked onto a single point within it. That alone was enough to tell Shaw that whatever was happening had already crossed a line. Shaw made a decision without announcing it, the kind that happened quietly and quickly when instinct overrode protocol. He stepped toward the exit, not rushed, not hesitant, just purposeful. No one stopped him. No one asked. In a room like this, movement always had a reason, and his looked like any other. The hallway outside felt different, cooler, quieter, the noise of the gym muffled behind the closed door. Shaw reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering for a fraction of a second before dialing a number he had not used in months. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, Older, steady, carrying the weight of years that did not need to be explained. Master Chief Donnelly. Shaw exhaled once, keeping his voice low. Sir, this is Petty Officer Shaw. I need to ask you something off the record. There was a brief pause on the other end, not of hesitation, but of attention sharpening. Go ahead. Shaw glanced back toward the closed door, as if the walls themselves might listen. There is a man here. Civilian. Maintenance. Name is Caleb Mercer. Another pause. Longer this time. Not silence. Recognition building. He has a mark. Shaw continued carefully, choosing each word. Back of the neck. Faded. Looks old. Not standard. Curved line, broken pattern. The air on the other end changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. When Master Chief Donnelly spoke again, his voice had lost all casual tone. You are certain about the placement? Yes, sir. And the name? You are sure? Shaw swallowed once, his eyes fixed on the blank hallway ahead. Yes, sir. The line went quiet for 2 full seconds. No background noise. No movement. Just silence that carried weight. Then Donnelly spoke again, slower now, each word deliberate. Petty Officer, listen very carefully. Do not question him. Do not challenge him. And under no circumstances, do you let anyone put hands on that man. Shaw felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, but understanding beginning to take shape. Sir, who is he? The answer did not come right away. When it did, it was quieter than before, but heavier than anything said so far. If it is who I think it is, you do not need to know who he is. Another pause. Then one final instruction. You just need to understand who he is not. The line clicked dead. Shaw lowered the phone slowly, the hallway suddenly feeling much smaller than it had a moment ago. Inside the gym, nothing had changed on the surface. But beneath it, everything already had. The door opened, and Ethan Shaw stepped back into the gym, but he did not walk the same way he had before. His pace was controlled, his posture steady, yet something in his presence had shifted, subtle but unmistakable to anyone trained to read more than movement. He did not return to his rack. He did not pick up a weight. Instead, his eyes moved directly to Commander Nathan Cole, and for a brief moment, the two men locked into a silent exchange that required no words. Cole saw it immediately. Not the phone call itself, not the conversation, but the result. Shaw gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. Confirmation. Cole exhaled once. Slow and measured, as if setting something in place inside his own mind. The decision was no longer forming. It had already been made. Across the room, Logan Pike was mid-set, the bar rising and falling with controlled effort, but even he felt the shift now. It was not loud. It was not announced. But the room had tightened again, and this time it carried weight. Pike racked the bar and sat up, wiping sweat from his forehead, his eyes scanning the space until they landed on the commander. Something about the way Cole was standing, still, centered, focused, pulled attention whether it was wanted or not. Caleb Mercer, meanwhile, had moved to the far end of the room near the cleaning cart, replacing a bottle back into its holder with careful precision. His routine remained intact, untouched by the invisible current moving through the space. If he felt the eyes on him, he did not acknowledge them. If he understood what was coming, he gave no sign. Commander Cole began to walk. Not quickly, not aggressively, just directly. Each step carried a quiet authority that did not need volume to be felt. Conversations lowered without instruction. Movement slowed. Even the steady rhythm of lifting began to stagger as attention shifted, drawn toward a line that was now impossible to ignore. Pike stood up fully, stepping slightly to the side as Cole passed, instinctively giving space without knowing why. Shaw remained where he was, watching, his chest tight with something that felt like anticipation mixed with respect he did not yet fully understand. Cole stopped a few feet from Caleb, close enough now that there was no mistaking the focus. The old man turned slightly, not startled, not hurried, just aware. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The gym held its breath without realizing it. Cole's eyes moved once more to the back of Caleb's neck, waiting, confirming. Caleb adjusted his stance, the fabric of his collar shifting just enough, and there it was again. The mark. Faded. Incomplete. Unmistakable to the one man in the room who knew what it meant. Cole's expression did not change dramatically. It did not need to. The recognition had already settled in. When he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, but it carried across the room with clarity that cut through everything else. Mercer, he said, not as a question, but as acknowledgment. Caleb met his gaze, steady as before. Yes, sir. Two simple words. No hesitation. No explanation. The room felt smaller now, every man inside it aware that something significant was unfolding, even if they could not yet see its shape. Pike took a step closer, drawn in despite himself, his earlier confidence now edged with uncertainty. He looked from Caleb to the commander, waiting for something to clarify what he had missed. But clarity did not come in the form of explanation. It came in silence, in posture, in the way Commander Cole straightened just slightly, the shift so precise it might have been overlooked by anyone not paying attention. But Shaw saw it, and in that moment, he understood. The room had already changed. The only thing left was for everyone else to realize why. Commander Nathan Cole drew in a slow breath, the kind that did not fill the lungs so much as settle the weight of a decision that had already been made. And then, without raising his voice, without adding a single unnecessary word, he stepped forward and came to a full, deliberate stop directly in front of Caleb Mercer, his posture straightening with a precision that cut through the entire room like a silent command. And then he rendered a salute, clean, exact, and unmistakable, the kind reserved for something far beyond routine respect. The effect was immediate, but not loud. It did not crash through the gym. It settled over it. Conversations died mid-sentence. Hands froze on bars. Even the faint hum of effort seemed to fall back, replaced by a stillness that no one had ordered but everyone obeyed. Logan Pike stood motionless, his earlier confidence draining not in embarrassment, but in confusion, trying to understand what he was seeing and failing to find a framework for it. This was not how the world worked, not the one he knew, not the one built on visible rank and measurable performance. He looked at Caleb again, really looked this time, searching for something that should have been obvious all along, but had never been there in a way he could recognize. Caleb Mercer did not return the salute immediately. He did not react with surprise or pride or anything that would draw attention back to himself. Instead, he stood exactly as he had been, one hand resting lightly on the handle of the broom, his posture unchanged, his expression steady, as if this moment did not belong to him, but to something much older than either man standing there. Then, after a brief pause that seemed to stretch longer than it was, Caleb set the broom aside with care, not dropping it, not rushing it, just placing it where it would not fall, and straightened fully, his back no longer bent, his presence shifting in a way that no one in the room had seen before. It was not a transformation. It was a reveal. He returned the salute. Not sharp, not exaggerated, just precise, controlled, and grounded in a familiarity that did not need to be performed. Commander Cole lowered his hand first, but his posture did not relax. "It is an honor, sir," he said quietly, the word chosen with intention, not rank, not protocol, but recognition. A ripple moved through the room, not of sound, but of realization beginning to take shape in fragments. Ethan Shaw stood still, his earlier uncertainty replaced by a clarity that settled deep and firm. He had not needed the name. He had not needed the history. The reaction had been enough. Around him, the others began to understand in pieces, not fully, not yet, but enough to feel the weight of what had just shifted. Pike took a step back, then another, not out of fear, but because the space in front of him no longer belonged to him. It never had. Caleb Mercer lowered his hand and gave the smallest nod, acknowledging the moment without holding on to it. "Just doing my job," he said, his voice as steady as it had been all morning. No explanation followed. None was needed. He reached down, picked up the broom again, and turned back to the floor, resuming the same slow, precise motion that had gone unnoticed before. But nothing about it was invisible anymore. The room remained quiet, not because it had to be, but because no one knew how to break it. And in that silence, something settled into place, something simple and unshakable. Respect does not arrive with noise. It arrives when the truth finally stands where it always was, waiting to be seen.